Some stories are better left unheard, but you're here now. Everything you're about to hear actually happened.
What is your most disturbing, scary, or creepy real story?
A few years ago, I was walking through the woods off the beaten track a bit and I smelt this really overpowering sweet smell. Being nosy, I pulled back the undergrowth to have a look and found a dead body. The guy had clearly been there a while and wasn't looking great. All swollen and green and black with various runny bits. The local wildlife had also been dining well for a few days. I called the police, who told me to wait with the body until they arrived. Being in the middle of nowhere, it took a while for them to arrive and it got dark, and I was just sat there in the dark with him for a long time. It turned out he had committed suicide. For a long time afterwards, I had dreams about him and he would talk to me and not nice things. Mainly about how he was angry I had disturbed his resting place and he wanted me to kill myself. Probably just my imagination, but pretty disturbing at the time. He still turns up in my dreams from time to time, and no doubt will be tonight after telling you this. A few summers ago, I went for a bike ride around midnight with a friend. When the night ended, we went our separate ways, and I had about 2 blocks to ride home alone. Because of construction, I had to ride on the sidewalk. The streets were completely quiet, and everything felt normal, until I reached the corner where I needed to turn onto my street. There was a man walking alone ahead of me. He looked to be in his 40s, a bit scruffy, but definitely not homeless. The sidewalk was narrow, and I didn't want to startle him. When I was about 6 feet behind him, I said, "Hey, behind you," to let him know I was there. He turned around and gave me an extremely angry look. I turned onto my street, and he followed me. He started screaming, threatening to hurt me and shouting insults as he chased after me. I live right near that corner, and I didn't want him to realize which house was mine, so I made a quick decision to loop around the block instead. That wasn't the scariest part. When I came back around and looked down the street, I saw him standing on my front stoop, staring out toward the road, as if he somehow knew where I lived. He saw me ride past again, but didn't say anything. I didn't go home that night. I went back to my friend's place instead. 2 days later, my bike was stolen from the alley behind my house. About 2 years ago, I was driving home late at night after a family reunion. The drive was about 2 hours long, and I didn't stay overnight because I had work the next day. Most of the road cut through dense bushes and trees on both sides. The kind of road that feels uncomfortable even during the day. About 45 minutes in, exhaustion hit me suddenly. Not slowly. All at once, I knew I wasn't gonna make it much farther. I kept driving, hoping I'd find somewhere safe to pull over. A rest stop, a gas station, anything. There was nothing, so I made a very bad decision. I pulled off the road onto the grass, behind some bushes, trying to hide my car from passing traffic. Cars still passed every few minutes. I checked the time, 11:22 p.m., and I fell asleep. Sometime later, I woke up to a scratching sound. I checked the clock, 11:50 p.m. The sound stopped after a few seconds. I was still exhausted, so I didn't even look around. I went back to sleep. Then it happened again. The scratching returned, but this time, it didn't stop. I opened my eyes and checked the clock, 12:40 a.m. That's when panic set in. I tried to tell myself it was just an animal. But one question wouldn't leave my mind. Why would it come back nearly an hour later? I slowly looked into my rearview mirror. And just for a moment, I saw something running back into the trees. I didn't wait. I started the car and drove off immediately. Just around the bend, no more than 100 yards ahead, there was another car parked on the side of the road. The driver's door was wide open. I slowed down, just enough to see if anyone was inside. There wasn't. Then I checked my rearview mirror. Nothing. And suddenly a man came sprinting around the corner. He was shouting, yelling for me to stop, demanding that I get out of my car. I didn't think. I didn't hesitate. I sped away as fast as I could. I never saw that man again. Moral of the story: never sleep on the side of a deserted road. When I was a young child, I had the same dream every night for years about drowning when a huge wave swept over me and I sank to the bottom. Years later, I had a temp job delivering mail one summer during college. I saw this old lady sitting on a front porch waiting for me. When I got up there, she looked at me and said in a foreign accent,
you drowned when Oceania sank beneath the waves.
Freaks me out until this day. My house sits farther back on the lot than most others on the street. The layout is unusual. The sidewalk runs along the length of the living room and ends at the front porch, which opens directly into that room. Large windows that don't open line the living room wall. They let in plenty of light during the day, but at night, they offer no privacy at all. At the time, the rest of my family was away on vacation, and I had the house to myself. I decided to drink heavily that night. I passed out on the living room couch around 9 o'clock. Later, when I woke up briefly, I realized I was too afraid to walk back to my bedroom, so I stayed on the couch, directly beneath those large windows. I woke up suddenly, for no clear reason. I was overwhelmed by chills, the kind that make your whole body tense. I couldn't understand why. Then the banging started. It came from directly above me. I didn't move, but I opened my eyes and looked up at the window. Someone was standing there, pounding on the glass. Without moving, I glanced at the cable box. It was around 3 in the morning. The banging continued. Then it stopped. I stayed completely still. Suddenly it started again, but this time from 2 different directions. Someone was pounding on the window. Another person was banging on the front door. They didn't stop. They didn't leave. This went on for nearly 40 minutes. Then, just as suddenly as it began, everything stopped. It was one of the most terrifying experiences I can remember. After that night, I was constantly on edge. The next day I called a friend and asked if he would come stay with me for the rest of the week. His response was,
"Why? So we can both be murdered in our sleep."
I was 17 and had just gotten my driver's license. Back in high school, my friends and I made it a goal to find abandoned houses where we could throw parties. We had a few decent spots, but the best one was a house I passed every day on my way home from work. It was an unfinished shell of a massive house, sitting on a large property with undeveloped land behind it. I told one of my friends about it, and one evening before going to see a movie, I decided to show it to him. It was summer just around dusk, and I had my headlights on. I pulled into the front of the house, and we were there for no more than 10 seconds before backing out to return to the main road. About a minute later, a large truck pulled up behind us with its high beams on, driving extremely close. We noticed it, but didn't think much of it as we continued toward the main road. When we reached the intersection, Primera turned right, but the truck cut through the gas station on the corner and blocked us in. A huge man stepped out of the truck. My friend and I were absolutely terrified. He knocked on my window, and I slowly rolled it down. What made it even stranger was that this was usually a very busy road. Suddenly, there was no one else around. He asked what we were doing at the house. I quickly lied and said we were just making a turn. He stared at us for a few seconds, then smiled, stepped back, and waved us on. To this day, that house is still unfinished, and I've always felt there was something illegal going on there. When I was about 10, all of my cousins and siblings were over. About 10 of us there. The parents and grandparents were out for an adult dinner, so it was just the kids sitting around watching a few movies, when all of a sudden, the house shook, and there was a large flash coming from the backyard. It felt as if a bomb dropped. We all heard, felt, and saw it, and as a pack, we ran into the hallway. The eldest cousins in the group debated on calling the police, but opted to call the parents. After a few minutes, we gained our courage and ventured out into the living room again, this time with weapons, just in case. After a half hour with no other issues, the parents came home and thought we were insane. There was nothing wrong with the backyard and no neighbors reported anything. It's been 10 years, and we still talk about it, trying to figure out what it was. That has been the scariest thing to happen to me, by far. Okay, so this happened to me last summer when I was back at my parents' house during the holidays. It was around 3 a.m., and I was in my room on my computer when I got a call from my sister. Now that was already a little bit weird since my sister's room is just down the hallway from mine, and she could have just came in my room. I went to pick up, and the call ended as soon as I reached the phone. I figured that she wanted to speak with me, so I got up and went to her room. As soon as I reached her door, she started screaming that someone was in the room with her, so I busted in, and of course, nobody was here. After she stopped crying, she told me that she woke up and saw a dark shadow just centimeters from her face in that S when she screamed. So I told her that she called me. She told me that her phone was not in her room and that she was sleeping. Sure enough, her phone is in her purse downstairs. The weird part is that I have the log of her call on my phone, but she doesn't. never managed to explain this one. This isn't supernatural, but it's one of the most disturbing and surreal experiences of my life. One early morning a few years ago, I was walking to my bus stop around 5 a.m., eating a banana. It was dark and misty, and I was half asleep, internally debating something trivial like whether to get my daily Starbucks before or after my commute. As I approached a dimly lit corner on my street, a tall man wearing a black mask stepped out of a dark alley to my left, sleepy and disoriented. I barely registered him. Then he shouted, "Put down your purse," and pointed a gun at my head. That's when everything snapped into focus. He told me to put down my bags. I said, okay. I'm putting them down right here. He ordered me to walk toward him, toward the alley, and get down on the ground. My heart was racing, and my hands still smelled like banana. I knew I needed to get away. I don't know why, but I couldn't stop talking. "Look, I'm on the ground. My stuff is over there. Please, just take it." He didn't like that. He shouted for me to be quiet, climbed on top of me, and pressed the gun to my head. At this point, I should explain that I was on my way to coach a high school practice and was dressed in oversized clothes, baggy pants, hat, jacket. If not for my voice, I could have passed for a teenage boy. As he looked down at me, something seemed to click. I'm convinced he realized I was a woman. He got off me, stood up, and pointed toward the dark alley. "Come with me." My stomach dropped. There had been recent reports of assaults in my neighborhood. When he pointed toward that alley, my instincts kicked in. Every part of me knew I couldn't go down there. I kept talking. "I'm coming. I'm following you," I said, and he believed me. I took 2 tiny steps backward toward the sidewalk. He turned his body and his gun toward the alley. That was my moment. I took a breath, lowered my head, and started sprinting. I ran 6 or 7 blocks before finally stopping, then circled back to my apartment, hoping he hadn't followed me or seen where I lived. The police checked the alley an hour later, but the man was gone. The only evidence left behind was my banana peel slowly browning in the alley. Even now, it still bothers me, but I'm grateful that what haunts me are the what-ifs, not the what happened. My grandmother believed this story until the day she died. It happened during the war in London, when my father was still a baby. After her home was destroyed in a bombing, she went to stay with a friend. The friend gave her a room on the top floor of the house. One night, as she was carrying my father upstairs to put him to bed, a figure suddenly appeared on the staircase. It spoke to her and told her not to sleep in that room that night. Terrified, she went back downstairs and told her friend that she and the baby would be sleeping in the sitting room instead. Her friend was annoyed, but eventually agreed. That same night, a bomb exploded near the house. The roof collapsed directly onto the room upstairs. It crushed the spot where my father's cot had been. If they had slept there, he would not have survived. She died weeks ago. So, who was seen walking through the house when my cousin was 17 or 18 years old? She was in a car crash and died a couple of weeks later in the hospital. She was really close to my aunt and used to babysit our kids all the time. My aunt's house was under construction just before she passed away, and the work continued after she was gone. One day, my aunt got a phone call at work from one of the construction workers. He was complaining about a teenage girl who kept showing up at the house and walking around. He said she had been showing up several times a week for a couple of weeks. My aunt asked for a description of the girl to see if she knew her. Sure enough, the description perfectly matched my cousin who had dyed long brown hair, a red baseball cap, denim dungarees, and a white jacket. When my aunt got home, she showed the workers a picture of my cousin. They all agreed that was the girl they had seen walking around the site. This house never kept an owner. We found out why. When I was in high school, I had a really good friend who lived next door to a house that was always up for sale. People would move out in the middle of the night without saying a word, and for a couple of years, it never had the same owner for more than 6 months. One night we were really bored, and he suggested we explore the house, since it had been empty for a while. We went around back, where there was a dog door he could crawl through. He unlocked the door from the inside and let me in. The house itself was completely unremarkable. It looked like it had been built sometime in the 1950s, a craftsman-style house in an older, nicer part of town. The kitchen had a built-in breakfast table set against a large picture window. The electricity was off, but you could see the streetlight glowing through the glass. My friend and I sat on the floor across from the table, just hanging out and talking for no real reason. Suddenly, my friend screamed. In that exact moment, my vision went completely black. It wasn't like I just couldn't see, I was engulfed in this sickly, unnatural cold from head to toe. I started screaming, and I felt my friend grab my hand and yank me forcefully in some direction. Slowly, my vision came back, and I began to feel warmth again. I realized we were outside, standing under the streetlight. It was December, and somehow it had been warmer inside that house. I finally looked at my friend. He was terrified. I was confused, shaking, and panicked, and I asked him what had happened. He told me that, while I was talking, a black thing crawled out from under the table. It was completely black, only vaguely shaped like a girl. He said it climbed on top of me. Apparently my eyes were wide open, but I was groping around like I couldn't see anything. He was so freaked out that he dragged me out of the house. We're still friends, and we talk about it every now and then. The story never changes, and it still sends chills down my spine. To this day, I've never felt such darkness or cold. It was palpable, almost sticky. 4 days afterward, I couldn't shake the feeling. I never walked past that house again. And honestly, I'm scared just remembering it. Something walks above me every night. It came downstairs once. Every time I stay at my grandma's house, I hear someone walking upstairs. It always starts on one side of the room, casually walks to the other, and then stops. This usually happens twice a night. I didn't start hearing it until I was about 14, when my grandparents made me start sleeping in a different room on the first floor, because they began sleeping in separate bedrooms. Both of their rooms are also on the first floor. For some backstory, I've always been terrified of the upstairs in their house. I don't know why, but it's always freaked me out. I refuse to go up there alone, and I'm 23 now and still won't. There's one room in particular that scares me the most. It's long and narrow. When you open the door, there are closets on both sides, a bed in the middle of the room, and a window at the far end. Growing up, my grandparents told me that the sons of the previous owner claimed they saw a gorilla come out of the closet at night, dance around the room, and go back inside. I never thought much of it until I started sleeping in the room directly below that one. One night, all the lights were off and I was still awake, lying in bed. Then, I heard it. It started at one end of the room upstairs, got closer, passed directly above me, and continued to the other end where it stopped. I was wide awake and absolutely terrified. There was no question in my mind that it was footsteps. I knew that slow, casual pace. I went to my grandpa's room and told him what I heard. He said the house was old and it creaks, but he turned the dining room light on so I'd feel safer. I went back to bed. Then, it started again. This time it began near the window upstairs, walked over me again, and stopped at the door. 5 seconds later, I heard it coming down the stairs. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Silence at the landing. Then 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 until it reached the first floor. I was frozen. Whatever it was on my floor now, and the dining room light didn't stop it. I stared at my doorway as my vision began to distort. I felt dizzy with fear and pulled the blankets over my head. Then I heard scratching inside my room. I knew exactly where it was coming from. My grandpa's gun case. Long scratches down the wooden door. I could hear it tapping lightly against the frame with each scrape. I tried to scream, but nothing came out. After forcing myself to breathe, I finally let out a loud scream. Within seconds, my grandpa was in my room. I was relieved, but he still didn't believe me. So I did what any normal person would do. I draped a sheet over the side of the bed and slept underneath it, wrapped myself tight in a comforter, put on headphones, and turned to my back to the door. There could have been a party of ghosts in my room and I wouldn't have known. The next morning, my grandpa told my grandma what happened. She laughed and said, "Oh, that's silly. No, your cousin woke me up the last time she stayed here saying she heard footsteps." I slept under the bed for the rest of that week. I've stayed there countless times since, and I still hear the footsteps. Every time, I sleep on top of the bed now, with my back to the door and headphones on. I haven't heard it come down the stairs again. But if it ever does, I don't want to know. Something in my house used to call my name. It wasn't my parents. When we first moved into the house I grew up in, I started hearing things calling my name from the opposite end of the house. I'd be in my room playing with Legos, and I'd hear my dad call my name from his bedroom. I'd go ask what he wanted, and both my parents would tell me they never called me. This happened once every couple of days. As a little kid, I honestly thought they were messing with me. Then, one night, it happened again. I heard my dad call my name and walk toward my parents' bedroom like always. But the moment I stepped inside their room, I heard my mom's voice calling for me from the living room on the complete opposite side of the house. That was the exact moment I knew no one was joking. I was standing there, looking directly at both of my parents, sitting in front of me. After that, I mostly kept it to myself. Years later, my brother was diagnosed with partial narcolepsy. One of the symptoms is auditory hallucinations, so I thought maybe that explained it. I went and got myself checked. Completely fine, so I have no idea what was calling my name all those years. And even now, whenever I visit and stay the night, I still hear it calling me from empty rooms. We were 13, and someone tried to kill us. I used to skateboard all the time with my friends, Tim and Brandon. One day after skating, we decided to go to 7-Eleven to grab some drinks before heading home. We didn't drive. We skated there and planned to skate or walk back. After we paid, we walked toward the exit of the parking lot and waited for the traffic light to turn red so we could cross the highway. It was a small town, so traffic wasn't heavy. While we were waiting, I looked back toward the gas pumps and noticed a man, probably in his 40s or 50s, pumping gas into a white truck. He was staring directly at me. Suddenly, he dropped the gas pump, jumped into his truck, and slammed on the gas. He drove straight at us. He barely missed us, but grazed my arm and knocked my skateboard out of my hand. The truck sped past and peeled into the parking lot next door. Then, it happened again. He drove through the ditch, separating the two lots, and tried to run us over a second time. That's when we ran. All three of us sprinted across the highway toward the local library, about 2 or 3 blocks away. When we were about half a block from it, I looked back and saw him speeding toward us, clearly furious. Tim and Brandon ran up to the library doors, but I remembered it was Sunday and the library was closed. I broke off toward the woods, knowing there was a trail that led to my backyard. As I reached the woods, I looked back one last time and saw the man pull into the parking lot and jump out of his truck. He grabbed something from the bed, either a shotgun or a crowbar. I was far away and terrified, so I couldn't tell for sure. I ran all the way home. When I reached my street, Tim's dad told me to get in his car. We drove to the video store where Tim's mom worked. When I got there, Tim and Brandon were already inside with 3 police officers. A minute later, my mom arrived in tears. Tim and Brandon had told her they didn't know if I had made it. Everyone thought I had been taken. Later, Tim told me he saw the man running into the woods after me. That part still chills me because I thought he was chasing him. He was never caught, and for the next 5 years, every time I saw a white truck, my heart dropped. I thought the laughter was in my head, until my mom saw the handprints. When I was a child, I lived in an old Victorian house with my mother. I was an only child, and almost every night, as I tried to fall asleep, I would hear laughter drifting through the hallway. I was around 5 or 6 when it started. Premeta told my mom, and she brushed it off, saying it was probably just the TV left on somewhere in the house. Then one night, I woke up, and the laughter was no longer in the hallway. It was in my room. I tried to sit up, but I couldn't. It felt like someone was holding me down. Invisible hands pressed into my shoulders, gripping hard while the laughter filled the room. I started screaming as loud as I could. My mom ran in and flipped on the bedside lamp. She held me and told me it was just a nightmare, until I said, "But my shoulders hurt." She lifted my shirt. There were 2 adult-sized handprints, clearly visible on my shoulders. For years, I convinced myself it never really happened that. My mind made it up. But recently, I mentioned it casually to my mom. She went completely pale and said, "I don't want to remember that." A young boy started having the same dream over and over, except in the dream, he wasn't himself. He was a World War II pilot who had already died. A few years ago, there was a local child who began having extremely vivid and recurring dreams about a World War II pilot who had been shot down somewhere in the Pacific. But these weren't ordinary dreams. In them, The child wasn't watching the pilot. He was the pilot. He described flying the plane, being shot down, and crashing into the ocean. What made it truly unsettling was the level of detail he knew. He could name the aircraft carrier the pilot had served on, the pilot's call sign, and even identify his closest friends. He also knew deeply personal details, the names of the pilot's sisters, and full conversations the pilot had once had with his fellow crew members. When people began to investigate, they found something disturbing. Every single detail the child shared was accurate. A major television program, reportedly 60 Minutes, featured the case and had historians and researchers verify the information. The names, the ship, the call sign, and the events all matched real historical records. What made the case even stranger was that the child had never read books about World War II, watched documentaries, or shown any prior interest in the subject. Later, the child's father wrote a book documenting the entire experience. To this day, it remains one of the most unsettling cases of a child seemingly remembering a life that wasn't his own. During night operations, your brain is trained to notice everything. Every sound, every shadow, every movement. But sometimes, what you see doesn't fit any explanation. This is one of those nights. While I was deployed in Kosovo, my team frequently carried out night missions that required us to move long distances quickly and quietly, remaining completely undetected. We often saw strange things at night, shadows, movement, sounds, but nothing like this. During one reconnaissance mission, we were inserted into a remote area to determine whether mortar rounds and mines were being moved through the region. Our extraction was scheduled before daybreak, and we had to cover just over 17 kilometers. The terrain was manageable, intelligence on the area was solid, and the moon was nearly full, giving us excellent visibility. Unless we ran into someone, it should have been an easy night. Our team usually consisted of 4 men, but this time we brought along 3 newer soldiers for training. To keep things safe, I took rear security with another experienced teammate. ILL column L, positioned just ahead of me. We worked well together and trusted each other completely. After moving roughly 10 kilometers without finding anything, we turned toward our extraction point, which required crossing a large hill and passing near, but not too close to a village. We regrouped, checked personnel, ammo, and gear, and continued moving. As rear security, I was the last to move. Just before stepping off, I heard a noise in the trees about 50 meters away. I remember counting my breaths, forcing myself not to move, telling myself that panic makes noise, and noise gets you killed. I turned and saw that Elle had noticed it too. The rest of the team kept moving, unaware. It was probably just an animal, but we began advancing cautiously using a 2-man bounding technique. The noise continued. Eventually, I told Elle to rejoin the team while I stayed back to observe. I took cover and waited. The moon was bright enough to cast shadows of our gear on the ground. The radio stayed silent. No chatter, no static, just footsteps and whatever was moving out there with us. A few moments later, I saw movement in the trees roughly 15 meters ahead of me. Everything went silent. I stayed perfectly still for several minutes, controlling my breathing and scanning my surroundings. Soon, the team moved back and surrounded the area I had indicated. When we advanced together, there was nothing there. No tracks, no footprints, no signs of anything at all. Naturally, the guys gave us a hard time afterward for getting spooked. We moved out again. A couple of kilometers later, we reached an orchard we needed to cross. The moonlight was bright, and the trees were evenly spaced, providing decent cover. The wind rustled through the leaves, and the weight of my rifle felt heavier than usual. The moonlight was bright, and the trees were evenly spaced, providing decent cover. As I was about to enter, I heard the noise again. This time, it sounded like a child giggling. It immediately caught my attention. It wasn't something my imagination would normally invent. Elle had already moved ahead and stopped to wait for me. I took my position and stayed low near a tree, watching. That's when I noticed something strange. In the knots of the tree beside me, I saw what looked like a human face. As I focused on it, the face became clear. A young girl. She turned toward me, smiled, waved, giggled softly, and then disappeared back into the tree. I was in complete shock. There was no chance I was reporting this to the team. Convinced I had finally lost my mind, I said nothing, ran forward, caught up to L, and we completed the mission without incident. 2 weeks later, I was assigned to provide security for a team of combat engineers in a different area. Meanwhile, my original team returned to the same location where Elle and I had been spooked, much to everyone's amusement. I was relieved not to be going back. After finishing my assignment, I returned to my barracks. Not long after, my team came in laughing, except for Elle, who looked angry and shaken. Someone joked that Elle refused to patrol that area anymore. A few days later, Elle and I were together on another assignment. Out of nowhere, he asked me, "What did you see that night?" I brushed it off and said it was probably my imagination. He looked at me and said something that sent chills down my spine. He didn't laugh. He didn't hesitate. He just looked at me and said, "I know you saw her. I saw her too. Tell me I'm not crazy." I told him he wasn't and asked where he saw her. He answered, "Inside a tree." When he said that, my stomach dropped. I had never told Elle what I saw. He had been nearly 40 meters away and couldn't have seen where I was looking. Yet somehow, we had both seen the same thing. I've been on countless missions since then. I've seen real danger. But nothing has ever unsettled me as much as that night, because whatever we saw was already there before us. The only way to turn the lamp on was to hold the doll's hand. I never touched it, but one day, the light turned on anyway. We were living with my grandparents at the time. In my aunt's bedroom stood a 2-foot-tall Victorian-style doll that had been converted into a lamp. The only way to turn it on was by holding the doll's cold plastic hand and slowly raising and lowering its arm. The doll stood on the nightstand beside my aunt's bed, fastened to door, greeting anyone who entered with a lifeless, dead-eyed smile. One afternoon, I was home alone and needed a blanket from my aunt's closet. Normally, I would never enter that room, but two things made it feel safe enough. First, it was broad daylight. Second, the closet was right next to the doorway. I told myself I wouldn't look at the doll. I stared at the floor, stepped into the room, turned my body around completely, and opened the closet door with my back facing the doll. I reached down for a blanket when suddenly, something felt wrong. The room was brighter. The light was on. I froze, not for seconds, but for what felt like forever. Every instinct screamed at me to run, but before I could move, I knew I had to look. Iwish primera a DNAT. When I turned to leave the room, I lifted my head and saw the doll's arm raised. Its hand was pointed directly at me. That image has been burned into my memory since I was 13. One morning, every clock in my house stopped agreeing with each other, and time only moved when I was watching it. About 4 years ago, I woke up late on a day off. I remember checking the time when I opened my eyes. 10:21 a.m. That detail matters. I got out of bed, used the bathroom, brushed my teeth, got dressed, and took my time enjoying the warmth. When I came back to my room and picked up my phone, the time read 10:25. That didn't make sense. There was no way all of that took only 4 minutes. I checked my bedroom alarm clock. It also said 10:25. Half asleep, I convinced myself I'd misread the time when I woke up. I went downstairs. I turned on my PC, turned on the TV, got a glass of water, started cooking breakfast. When I put leftover rice into the microwave, I noticed the clock. 10:25. I checked my phone again, still 10:25. There was absolutely no way I had done all of that in under a minute. I decided to test it. I stared directly at the microwave clock and started counting to 60. About 20 seconds into my count, the time changed to 10:26, which made sense. It must have already been close to turning. Relieved, I finished cooking, plated my food, and sat down at my PC. The time on the computer said 10:20. I pulled out my phone. 10:20. That's when I started writing everything down. I opened the clock on my screen and watched the second hand carefully. As long as I stared at it, time moved normally. 10:21. 10:22. But over the next hour, maybe hour and a half, something strange happened. If I looked away for more than a couple of minutes, the clocks stopped making sense. At one point, both my phone and PC read 10:14. Later, 10:13. Then suddenly, Bike into Titan. 20 south again. Internet clocks. Phone clocks. Appliance clocks. All wrong, unless I was actively watching them. Eventually, after about 90 minutes, everything returned to normal. It's never happened again. But I still remember the exact time I woke up that morning. Las 10:21. My mom saw me in the backyard, while I was miles away. This happened during my junior year of high school. I had just gotten off the bus a couple of stops early to go hang out at my friend S' house. We were in his basement, playing video games, when his mom comes downstairs. She'd had just gotten a call from my mom, who sounded angry and panicked, and was demanding I come home immediately. When I walked through my front door, the atmosphere was incredibly tense. My mom, my sister, and my sister's friend were all sitting in the living room, and they all looked completely shaken. My mom immediately started grilling me, asking where I'd been and what I was doing after school. I told her I went straight to my friend's house, but she just wasn't buying it. Eventually, she got frustrated and sent me to my room. A few minutes later, my sister came in and started asking me the same questions all over again. That's when I finally asked her what on earth was going on. She told me that while I was gone, my mom was upstairs and heard a man's voice calling my name from outside her bedroom window. When she looked out into the backyard, she saw my sister, her friend, and a shirtless man standing right behind my sister's friend, hugging her. My mom was absolutely convinced that the man was me. She rushed outside to confront me, but by the time she got there, it was just my sister and a friend. No man, no footsteps. Nothing. She accused them of covering for me, thinking I was hiding somewhere nearby, but they swore they had been alone the entire time. Now, here's the part my mom didn't know. My sister's friend had come over that day because she was really struggling. It was the 1-year anniversary of her fiancé's suicide, and his name was the same as mine. My mom had no idea about any of this when she heard that voice, or when she saw that man in the backyard. But she swears, to this day, that what she saw was real. I almost died 3 times in 6 days, and then something followed me into my dreams. This is a true story. Late last December, just before Christmas, my friend and I were driving home after our final exam. We stopped at a red light on a 4-lane road. Suddenly, I heard tires screech and another car slammed into the rear right side of mine. We pulled over, exchanged information, and started taking photos. I stepped into the left lane to get a better angle, then my friend called me back to unlock the trunk. The moment I stepped back, a distracted driver drifted into the exact lane I had just been standing in, missing me by less than a foot at 70 kilometers per hour. 2 days later, we went paintballing. Between games, everyone was in the lobby with masks off. I was leaning against a wall when my friend asked to borrow money. I leaned to the side to hand him my wallet splat. A paintball slammed into the wall exactly where my head had been. A kid across the room had accidentally fired his marker. At that speed, a shot to the eye could have blinded or killed me. 2 days later, we were out drinking. I walk fast, so I kept stopping to wait for my friends. This time, I decided not to. I walked ahead, then suddenly stopped to shout back that I'd meet them inside. That's when I heard an engine scream. A speeding Porsche crashed into a building 10 meters in front of me, hitting the wall at a right angle. The engine collapsed. Windows exploded. If I hadn't stopped, I would have been between the car and the building. 2 days later, Boxing Day morning, I had a nightmare. In the dream, I knew someone was trying to kill me. I ran into my house, tied a rope to the front door, locked everything, and called 911. The operator told me no officers were available. Then I noticed the rope had been cut. Every sound in the house turned on at once: TV, radio, kettle, shower. And I saw someone's foot step onto the stairs. I woke up screaming, soaked in sweat. The first word out of my mouth wasn't fear. It was a name: Slender Man. It's not something I tell people often, but when I was about 7 or 8 years old, I woke up too loud, banging on my bedroom window. At first I thought it was just the wind and tried to go back to sleep, but then I started hearing footsteps in my room. My bedroom was big enough to walk around in front of my bed, and that's exactly what it sounded. Like slow footsteps circling me. I tried to convince myself it was just the house settling, the kind of noises houses make at night. I used to sleep with the radio on, and at that exact moment it started playing a very depressing song. I don't remember the name of it, but even today, If I hear it, I get chills. The room started feeling colder, not normal. Cold and naturally cold. I was terrified. I decided to run to my parents' room down the hall. But as I passed through the area where the footsteps had been, the air became so cold I could see my breath. I froze for a second, and that's when I heard a voice say, "I'm lost." I bolted down the hallway, ran into my parents' room, crawled under their bed, and cried myself to sleep. The man in her doorway never existed. A former teacher once told me this story, and she swears it's true. When she was a child, she shared a bedroom with her younger sister. One night, while lying in bed, her sister suddenly told her to look toward the door. She did and saw the silhouette of a man standing in the doorway. There was a light switch right next to her bed, so she reached over and turned it on. The doorway was empty. Terrified, they called for their father. He came in and asked what was wrong. They told him what they had seen, but he brushed it off, saying it was probably just their eyes playing tricks on them. The next morning, my teacher went downstairs and saw her father sitting silently at the kitchen table, staring into nothing. She asked him what was wrong. He looked at her and said, "Was the man you saw?" "A tall man." She later said that every member of her family saw the same silhouette over the years. Always the same thing. They'd turn on a light and no one would be there. I've been creeped out ever since she told me. My dad answered. A voice outside, and no one was there. This story happened to my dad, and he's not the type to make things up. Even now, he can't tell it without getting goosebumps. About 6 months ago, my parents were staying at a friend's beach house for a short vacation. The friends had always mentioned the house next door, how it had gone through 5 different owners in just 3 years. The most recent owner had committed suicide only 3 weeks earlier. No one knew why. My parents arrived in the evening. Everything felt normal at first. They spent the day settling in, relaxing. Nothing unusual until they started getting ready for bed. That's when my dad smelled gas. He realized the pilot light had gone out, so he went outside to shut the gas off. The moment he stepped out, he said a deep sense of unease washed over him. He got chills. He felt watched, nervous for no reason he could explain. As he was turning the gas shut-off valve, he suddenly heard a voice behind him say, clearly, "What are you doing?" It sounded so real, so normal, that my dad instinctively answered, shutting off the gas. The second the words left his mouth, it hit him what he had just done. He froze. He turned around. No one was there. At first, he thought it had to be my mom. Panicked, he rushed back inside, only to find her in the bathroom, brushing her teeth. She hadn't left the room. My dad didn't sleep at all that night. By 3 a.m., they packed up and drove home. Later, they told their friends what happened. Their friends went pale. They told my parents the man who had lived next door, the one who committed suicide, had done it by gassing himself inside the house. To this day, my dad swears that voice was real, and I've never seen him that scared in my life. My sister had an imaginary friend when she was little, and honestly, the story still gives me chills. She used to say this friend was a really kind older lady named E. They were inseparable, playing and talking all the time. But then, when my sister turned 4, he just vanished. Fast forward a few years. My sister's about 10 now. One afternoon, my mom and dad get a call and have to rush out to my grandpa's nursing home. It was an emergency. I was at one end of the house, and my sister was in our bedroom. Suddenly, the radio in our room just clicks on by itself. It blasts to full volume, then drops to 0, and then shuts off completely. It did this 3 times in a row. I was so annoyed, I stormed into the room to yell at her, but she was just sitting on her bed, pale as a ghost and totally frozen. I went to unplug the radio, thinking she was messing with me, but there was no plug. It didn't even have batteries. It was the only radio in the entire house. I turned to my sister, and she whispered, "It was E." I saw her. It was E. Freaking out, I called my mom, and that's when she told us. Our grandpa had just passed away. A few days later at the funeral, a relative showed us an old photo she'd found. My sister stared at it and said, "That's her. That's E." It was a picture of my grandparents on their wedding day. My grandmother had passed away when my mom was just 11, Long before any of us were born, we were living in the same house my mom grew up in, but there were no pictures of her anywhere. My step-grandmother had thrown them all out years ago. When I was 13, my grandmother was dying of cancer. During her final weeks, my mother and I stayed at her house to care for her. BT's point, my grandmother was completely bedridden and so weak she couldn't move on her own. One night, around 3 in the morning, my mother burst into my room and shook me awake. She was terrified. She told me my grandmother had just walked into her bedroom, woke her up, and then walked back out. At first, we weren't thinking about anything supernatural. We were just really worried. My grandmother was days away from passing and physically unable to walk. We both ran to her room as fast as we could. When we got there, we found she had passed away. In the shock and grief of that moment, we never talked about how strange the whole thing was. Life just went on. It wasn't until months, maybe even years later, that I finally brought it up and asked my mom about that night. She told me she had no memory of it at all. She doesn't remember telling me my grandmother walked into her room. She doesn't remember what woke her up. She doesn't even remember waking me. I still get chills just thinking about it. Whatever lived in our house stopped only after my mother spoke to it. When I was 8 years old, my family moved from urban South Florida to a tiny town in North Florida. It felt eerie from the start, like the setting of a horror novel. Over the next 15 years, a lot of strange things happened there, but nothing compares to what occurred when my sister moved back in with my parents. Her husband had been deployed to Afghanistan, leaving her alone with a newborn baby. Not wanting to raise her son by herself in a trailer deep in the woods, she decided to stay at my parents' house for a while. At first, it was small things. She said the headboard of her bed would slam violently for no reason. Then one night, she woke up because someone or something was tickling her. She brushed it off. Until one night she woke my mother by screaming. My sister was nearly 30 years old, not a child. When my mom rushed into the room, she saw the bed shaking violently, up and down, side to side like a boat caught in rough water. Despite everything, they endured it. But then one night, while my sister was nursing her baby, something grabbed her ponytail and yanked her head backward. That was the final straw. My mother stormed into the room and spoke firmly into the air, as if addressing an unseen presence. She said she understood that things had changed, that there was now a baby in the house, and that curiosity was natural. But she made one thing clear. They were not to be touched ever again. After that night, it stopped. I never met her, Grandma, but I think she noticed me. About a month ago, I went over to a friend's house. The moment I stepped into the living room, I felt deeply uneasy and unshakable sense of anxiety I couldn't explain. I later found out they had recently replaced a china cabinet with one that had belonged to her grandmother, who had passed away a few months earlier. Her grandmother had been bedridden in the hospital, and I had never met her. The entire time I was there, I felt anxious and strangely sad, especially when I was near that cabinet. When I mentioned it, my friend brushed it off and went to the bathroom. While she was gone, I walked closer to the cabinet. It was about 6 feet tall, made of dark wood, with glass doors in the front and a mirror lining the back. Inside were teacups and small baby dolls. As I was looking at them, I could have sworn I saw a figure in the mirror behind me. Just a silhouette. I called out to my friend and immediately heard a sharp, piercing scream from the bathroom. I ran to the door and started pounding on it. When it opened, she was sitting on the floor, crying. She told me she had seen someone in the bathroom mirror. We ran out of the house, no shoes, no jacket, straight to my car. I drove for over an hour with no destination, just trying to get away. When I finally brought her back, her mother was sitting on the front steps. She said she'd been seeing shadows moving inside the house. I was home alone, sick, and only 10 years old. And I didn't realize someone was watching me until I remembered the back door was unlocked. When I was around 10 or 11 years old, I got sick and stayed home from school one day. My parents both had to work and couldn't take the day off, so they told me to stay inside and not open the door for anyone. The usual stranger warnings. I was sitting in the living room watching TV. The room had a large bay window that faced a busy main road, with a row of shops across the street. After a while, I felt uncomfortable with so many people walking past, so I partially closed the curtains. As I did, I noticed a man in his late 40s or early 50s, with a beard and glasses. wearing a green knitted jumper. There was something about him that felt off. I brushed it aside at first, until I saw him walk past again about 10 minutes later, in the same direction, as if he had looped around the block. 10 minutes after that, he appeared a third time. This time, he stopped at the edge of the driveway and stared at the window for around 30 seconds. Then he walked toward the front door, looking inside as he passed. The house was an old Victorian sandstone building, with heavy storm doors that could only be opened with a key. He knocked several times, but something in my gut told me not to answer. He then moved to the window, banging on the glass and saying something I couldn't make out. Suddenly, I saw a realization cross his face, like he had remembered something to bike door. My parents never locked it so the dog could come and go freely. I ran to the kitchen, and within seconds of turning the key and locking the door, the handle started moving. Then he began violently banging on it. I curled up on the floor, frozen in fear as he tried opening windows around the house. This went on for nearly 30 minutes, before he finally left. Even now, I dread to think what could have happened if I had Auntie remembered that the back door was unlocked. My 4-year-old sister described her own death. When I was about 15 or 16, my little sister, she was only 3 or 4, drank some green nail polish remover she found by the bathroom sink. It looked like mouthwash, and we think she was just copying what she'd seen our parents do. We panicked. Our local pharmacy rushed over ipecac and another medicine. While we were waiting, she was lying on the bathroom floor, crying and clearly in pain. Then, completely out of nowhere, she looked at us and said, "I drank some green stuff and died one time." We all froze. She continued, calmly. My husband ran off with another girl. I got sad. I drank some green stuff and died. My girls were crying when I died. None of us knew what to say. She was barely old enough to form full memories, let alone describe a marriage, children, betrayal, and death. We were absolutely terrified. She ended up being physically fine, but what she said that day never left us.
Wait, take a breath, you'll need it.
Every night, no matter the weather, something walks down our street. You only hear it from the living room or the kitchen, and it always starts at exactly 3:03. The whistling starts down the street, moves past us, then fades away. When we were younger, my sister and I would sneak out to listen, but there was one rule we never broke. Don't try to look at whatever is whistling. My neighborhood is a good place. Quiet, safe, full of kids. But there are two strange things here. The night whistling and the luck. People here are lucky. Promotions, prizes, small miracles. My sister Nola was born very sick. She couldn't breathe. On her own, we moved into this neighborhood to be closer to the hospital. And almost immediately, she started getting better. But every blessing here has a cost. When new people move in, the welcoming committee visits, they explain the luck. And the whistling. People who looked for the whistler lost everything. Not everyone dies, but the light goes out of them. My dad installed shutters on every window. The first night, I sat with my dad and listened. Doom, everything stayed fine. Until Holden slept over. He wanted to look. He stole the key to the blinds. The whistling was right outside. I grabbed my sister and shut my eyes. The blind opened. The whistling stopped. Holden looked, and he screamed. Then the knocking started. Something copied my mom's voice. It knocked everywhere. It stopped when the sun came up. Holden's family moved out days later. They looked empty, hollow. We still live here. We hear the whistler every night. Some things you don't need to look for. My mother tried to kill me when I was a baby, and I didn't find out until I was 17. My mother tried to kill me when I was a baby. I just didn't know it yet. Growing up, I was absolutely terrified of water. Not nervous panic. Baths, pools, even puddles. I'd scream until my throat hurt. I begged people to tell me why, but no one ever did. On my 17th birthday, a friend invited me to a pool party. I stayed near the edge. Then someone shoved me into the pool. I completely lost it. Crying, screaming, hyperventilating. I almost couldn't breathe. Someone pulled me out. People apologized, and I went home shaking. That night, My foster dad sat with me and hugged me. After a while, he said he had something to tell me. He said, "You were put into foster care because your mother tried to drown you." He told me she filled a bathtub and held you under the water until your father found her. When they asked her why, she said it was because she didn't like the way you looked at your dad, and that you were looking at her the same way while she was holding you under. She tried to drown me as an infant, and that's why. Something hit my bed, right next to my face. When I was about 7, I stayed up late, watching TV with my sister. I fell asleep later in my room, still inside a sleeping bag. In the middle of the night, I woke up to the feeling of something slamming the mattress inches from my face. I froze, then passed it off and closed my eyes. It happened again. Harder, like whatever it was wanted me awake. I ran into my sister's room, shaking, begging to sleep there. She said I was just scared for no reason, but I refused to go back. Later that night, we heard a loud bang from my room. All my posters had fallen off the walls. The bin bags outside my door were knocked over too. I didn't sleep in that room for a week, because I knew something was in there with me. A stranger tried to abduct my brother on a highway at midnight. My brother and his friend, both 18, decided to ride their bikes from Port Coquitlam to Abbotsford for the weekend. They left at 4 p.m., expecting to arrive around 2 or 3 a.m. But something terrifying happened long before that. At midnight, someone in a pickup truck drove past them a few times, then parked and tried to grab them. They ran across a farmer's field, jumping over barbed wire fences to escape. A few months later, police arrested a child serial killer, Clifford Robert Olson, who lived in the area. They strongly suspected he was the one after them.
Some stories don't end when the lights turn on. Thank you for watching. Stay tuned. Before you go, subscribe and like. You'll need this channel later.